Have you had trouble with the Biden economy? Have you seen your grocery bill rise at a rate to rival Nancy Pelosi's eyebrows? Well, Twitter is here to say that you are wrong, that it is in fact the Biden boom time, and they have such great statistics to support that particular proposition, such as the 5.7% GDP rise, or the 7% inflation rate, or the massive amounts of supply chain shortages going on all across the country. Such great things that the Biden economy has wrought for us, and they have supported that particular position along with massive walls of text that have been reposted 1,000 million times over and over and over again, as is leftist tradition, posting entire books as memes, and they have also supported it by doing copy pastas and astroturf Twitter hashtags. Woohoo! All in an attempt to convince the American public that the Biden economy isn't terrible and sitting in that pile of refuse that's been laying there and rotting for the past year and a half. No. That's not the big problem. We need to look at the GDP. It's so great. Look at what Biden's done for the economy. Look at all of the inflation that he totally hasn't caused. It's totally fine. And they have, of course, been doing this all the while ignoring most of the statistics when it comes to the actual economy, instead laying their hat on one statistic alone, which, as it might be mentioned, is not the be-all and end-all, despite what Democrats claim sometimes. Of course, when it's a Republican in office, the GDP is a completely irrelevant statistic that has nothing to do with anything at all, and should be completely ignored as a statistic for economic calculation. But it turns out that it is a useful statistic for economic calculation, despite my arguments to the fact that it is misleading in this context. And that is because every economic statistic, much like every other sort of statistic, is flawed. It's not going to present in one number how well the economy is doing in a full picture. It's only going to paint part of the picture. And much like a chain, when it comes to the economy, the weakest link is the one where it will break. And when your weakest link is an inflation rate that's reaching Carter levels, well, let's just say that your chain is about as brittle as Biden's colon in front of the Pope. It's not exactly going well. And so they haven't been exactly successful when it comes to courting the American public, because you see, Biden's polling numbers have been in the absolute gutter for the past couple of months, and that goes double for his economic numbers, which were never particularly good to begin with. And so no one basically trusts Biden with the economy, and he has a rising disapproval of somewhere around 70% on the economy. It's a bit touch and go, I guess you'd say. And so he's been trying to push this incredibly hard, but despite the fact that he has fawning media coverage that are connoisseuring his every choice of ice cream and giving him glowing praise for every single media press conference where he can hardly get through a sentence, and despite the a complete astroturfing of multiple Twitter hashtags in support of Biden, and the every single governmental department spinning all of the statistics to make it look as good as possible, he still hasn't been able to convince anyone, and it's for one simple fact. Most people don't think on a statistical level when it comes to the economy. They aren't thinking about their next $1 million investment. For those sorts of people, yeah, the GDP looking good sure sounds great to them, and that's why the stock market's also up today. But for most normal people, they're thinking about what their next food is going to look like. They're looking at their grocery bill going from $90 to $120 in all of a 1-month period and asking, where did all my money go? That's what they're asking. And so Biden ends up shooting himself in the foot by relying on these high-level statistics like GDP. Instead of bringing a favor with the American people, instead he looks completely out of touch, along with every other Democrat who's been parroting the idea that Biden's economy is good despite all of the evidence. And people aren't just going to ignore the evidence of their eyes. They're going to pay attention to those sorts of things, except I guess we can rule out the midwits who will take the evidence of their eyes and decide that it must be completely inaccurate because Zong my reliable sources. But at the same time, those are the same sorts of people who would take the evidence of their eyes once again and say, well, Snopes did rate it mostly false, so it must be completely inaccurate. And so they're not exactly the sorts of people you should be paying attention to when it comes to your actual political strategy. But that's what Biden is going to do. And so he's going to continue down into this descending pit of despair when it comes to economic policy and his polling numbers. He's going to continue to see these sorts of efforts backfire on him over and over again because fundamentally the Democrats are completely incompetent when it comes to the economy. And that is where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do subscribe down below and check me out on other platforms. I'm on BitChute, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Brighteon, I'm on all of those places that aren't authoritarian like YouTube. And I suggest you also check out my Minds, Gab, and Getter page where you'll see some occasional text posts and that like. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily. Don't be square.